Okay. Welcome to the top 10 at 10. Today is May the 19th, 2014. I'm your host, Dan Wright, writer at FarDogLake.com, and these are the top 10 news stories. Story number 10 from the New York Times from about the Koch brothers, or at least one of the Koch brothers, 1980 campaign for president. I believe he was vice president, I take it. So, and how it sort of shaped the network he built. He backed the full legalization of abortion and the repeal of laws that criminalized drug use, prostitution, and homosexuality. He attacked campaign donation limits and assailed the Republican star Ronald Reagan as a hypocrite who represented no change whatsoever from Jimmy Carter and the Democrats. It was 1980, and the candidate was David H. Koch, a 40-year-old bachelor living in a rent-stabilized apartment in New York City. Mr. Koch, the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, and his older brother Charles, one of the party's leading funders, were mounting a long-shot assault on the fracturing American political establishment. The Kochs had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the burgeoning libertarian movement in the waning days of the 1970s in the wake of Watergate, Vietnam, and a counterculture challenging traditional social mores. They set out to test just how many Americans would embrace what was then a radical brand of politics. It was the first and only bid for high office by a Koch family member, but much of what occurred in that quixotic campaign shaped what the Kochs would have become today, a formidable political and ideological force determined to remake American politics, driven by opposition to government power and hostility to restrictions on money and campaigns. Yeah, I actually knew about this, but I guess this is probably news to a lot of people that David Koch, I knew one of the Koch brothers was a vice presidential candidate and attacked Ronald Reagan from the right in 1980. They apparently also, I'm not sure if that's in here, but they apparently got a decent percentage of the vote, obviously being able to self-fund and having a lot of money to do it. The election also handed the Kochs their first political setback, driving them to rethink their approach to libertarian ideas. Since then, they have built a powerful network of political nonprofit groups that is exempt from most campaign reporting requirements and contribution limits, but will spend tens of millions of dollars to influence the 2014 election. They have exerted enormous influence on American politics, battling government regulation, and casting doubt on the urgency of climate change. Instead of replacing the Republican Party, they have helped to profoundly reshape it. So I think that's a fair analysis that after they tried to build a third party, the Libertarian Party, which still exists, but is not, I can't think they were in Gary Johnson, 2012 or 20, I think it was 2012, but they don't win any elections. I think they're a lot of libertarians, but not enough. Most of them are in the Republican Party. So the Koch brothers decided that instead of trying to build a third party, they tried to take over one of the two big ones, the Republicans in this case. So interesting story over at the New York Times. Story number 9, there's still fallout from this firing of Jill Abramson over at the New York Times. This is from Re/Code. I know the writer, Kara Swisher from All Things Digital at the Wall Street Journal. This is her own venture. It's called The League of Pushy Women, Self-Appointed Chapter Head. Oh, okay, no. The title is Dear Jill, from one pushy media dame to another. Let me be perfectly clear, when it comes to ousted New York Times executive editor Jill Abramson, she has on some occasions I have spent with her scared the bejesus out of me. That said, it was in a very good way. Okay. Other words, okay, so this is sort of, a lot of people consider this firing, or at least the framing of it, sexist. I'll leave that up to you. But so let's be clear, since too many people, both men and women, don't seem to be able to grok this too well, despite it being obvious to many. Phrases like crazy scary are often meant to send women quickly back behind the be nice ladies line and tap into the societal pressure for females to tamp down their confidence or package it in a more attractive ways. Other words used are loudmouth, jarring, strident, shrill, overbearing, bossy, bitchy, and of course pushy, which is in many ways the worst of them, as it is defined thusly: excessively or unpleasantly self-assertive or ambitious. This is a word that has now been stuck like glue to Abramson, who was very famously fired last week by publisher Arthur Sulzberger Jr. Sulzberger, who initially got his job by being born. Well, let's just say it, shall we? Arthur Sulzberger Jr. and Abramson were reported by New York Times writer New Yorker, writer Canaletta had a fraught relationship almost from the start of her tenure as executive director nearly 3 years ago. By the way, he picked her. According to Aletta, who has copiously chronicled the ups and downs of the Times over the years, it was a mutual dislike. Quote, he saw her as difficult, high-handed, and lacking in finesse in her management of people at the paper. She, in turn, was increasingly resentful of his intrusions into her command of editorial operations and of his increasingly close relationship with Mark Thompson, the company's CEO, who came from England and the BBC to run the business side. In Aletta's telling, the final straws were Abramson's hiring of a lawyer over disparate pay issues, an increasingly hot-button issue everywhere, and also her attempted effort to snag a second managing editor for digital without clearing it first with the managing editor, Dean Baquet. While emails quoted by Aletta seem to indicate that Thompson was on board with that hire, the idea of Abramson not consulting a subordinate properly was apparently a pushy bridge too far for the Times. So, I don't know if this is a greater commentary on pushy women, quote unquote pushy women, I guess I should say for this article, or women in executive positions. There's another term called the glass cliff. I don't know. So we'll have to see. There's more. This story just won't end. I guess the media is completely obsessed with it. I don't know how much regular people really give a shit, but yeah. So this is an interesting breakdown by Kara Swisher over at her new publication on the League of Pushy Women. Story number 8. This is actually a sort of in a way, a farewell post from Richard Mellon Scaife, who was a mini Koch, I should say, who owns the Tribune, or the Pittsburgh Tribune, and this is his farewell. Well, not farewell, but he says here, he has recently doctors told me I have an untreatable form of cancer. Some who dislike me may rejoice at the news. Naturally, I can't share their enthusiasm. He goes on to talk about, his role in political causes and charitable causes, but he says his most, important or fulfilling work of his life has been in the newspaper business. Newspapers, more than any other medium, keep a watchful eye on the government at all levels of business and technology, medicine and science, and other aspects of our lives. Much of what you read or hear on blogs and other internet sites, on TV and radio, originated in a newspaper. Many of those other media are useful, yet none consistently produces the quality and quantity of important news that you find daily in almost any American newspaper. The works of my newspapers gives me immense pride. We've exposed public corruption and incompetence, threats to public safety and health. We've interviewed many of the leading political figures of the past decade. We've reported on wars and other events around the world, and we've also reported big and small, tragic and uplifting stories that make up the daily lives of families, neighborhoods, and communities across western Pennsylvania. Many of these stories would never have been told if not for Tribune newspapers. So this is a sort of, as he's said, he has inoperable cancer or incurable, so he's, I guess, going to die at recently or soon. And this is a sort of announcement as well as his, testament. I hope newspapers remain strong guardians of our lives, a crucial source of critical information, as they have always been, because the health, security, freedom, and well-being of our communities, our nation, all of us individually depend on them. So there you go. Richard Mellon Scaife, on the way out, has something nice to say about newspapers, at least. He funded a lot of the stuff on Clinton and a lot of the right-wing reactionary stuff. So I don't know. Take it what, look at the complete picture. Take it for what it is. Story number 7. The U.S. military's new normal in Africa. This is originally this is on Truthdig, but it was originally Tom Dispatch. What is Operation New Normal? It's a question without an answer, a riddle the U.S. military refuses to solve. It's a secret operation in Africa that no one knows anything about, except that someone does. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee McGee. That is your real name. He lives and breathes Operation New Normal, but he doesn't want to breathe paint fumes or talk to me, so you can't know anything about it. Confused? Stay with me. Whatever Operation New Normal may be pales in comparison to the real New Normal for U.S. Africa Command, AfricaCom. The lowercase variant is bold and muscular. It's an expeditionary force on a war footing. To the men involved, it's a story of growth and expansion, new battlefields, combat, and war. It's a culmination of years of construction, ingratiation, and interventions. The fruits of wide-eyed expansion and dismal policy failures, the backing of proxies to fight America's battles while increasing U.S. personnel and firepower in and around the continent. It is, to quote an officer with AfricaCom, I gotta say this because I'm going to be saying it a lot, I imagine, the blossoming of a war-fighting combatant command. And unlike Operation New Normal, it's finally heading for a media outlet near you. So this is sort of the background in a lot of this Boko Haram stuff, and which is a clear sort of media campaign to get people to give the go-ahead for AfricaCom increasing its footprint or legitimizing the footprint that already exists. So definitely read this piece from Nick Terse. And story number 6, Tim Geithner, unreliable narrator. This is from Felix Salmon over at Medium. It says, I'm slowly making my way through Tim Geithner's book. I might wind up writing a proper review somewhere, sometime, but already one thing has become generally received wisdom about the book. Whatever you might think of Geithner's actions and opinions, he's at least presenting himself in an honest, unvarnished manner. Geithner isn't being honest about his actions and the actions of others, and the whole book becomes much more problematic. And already critics on the right have, predictably enough, accused Geithner of lying. Most of the time, the accusations boil down to he said, she said. But sometimes Geithner makes simple declarations which are easily fact-checked. So he fact-checks one of them. I can't go into entirely. This is Geithner at his most prescient and heroic. He enters a hidebound wood panel institution where coffee is brought to his desk on a silver tray, while briefings involve precious little discussion and debate. But here's the thing. We can read the speech. It's archived on the Fed's website, and it's pretty easy to tell whether Geithner did indeed try to push back against complacency in his speech and warn of the rise of the shadow banks. Spoiler, he didn't. The speech is long, and I encourage you to read the whole thing. None of this sounds like a warning, and indeed, Geithner's main cautionary message seemed to be directed not so much at the bankers as at their regulators, including at the NY Fed. So, it looks like Tim Geithner, I mean, there's a lot of big questions about this, this memoir. Everybody writes memoirs that are, flattering. Why else would you write it? As I read the rest of Geithner's book, then, I'm basically forced to treat out the author as an unreliable narrator. Geithner might seem to be straight up and guileless, but his report of his speech shows that he can remember things, even things which are easily found on the internet, in an extremely self-serving manner. Maybe that's only to be expected from a political memoir, but it's disappointing all the same. Story number 5. Wall Street Super PAC paid Jeffrey supporters $150 on E-Day from New Jersey. Yours truly. It was all conspiracy, right? While much of the corporate media, particularly the now ex-Newark Star Ledger, ignored the forces behind education reform in Newark, journalist Max Blumenthal decided to actually investigate. On Election Day, the Wall Street Super PAC Newark First reportedly dumped $300,000 to pay workers, many of whom were truant students, $150 apiece to help get the vote out for Shavar Jeffries. Blumenthal spoke to E-Day workers who confirmed the payments. Blumenthal also interviewed Achille Buchanan, vice president of the New York Teachers Union, who said students were being told, ironically, to ditch school to get paid to help Jeffries, the education reform candidate. Talk about school choice. Despite all the money spent by Wall Street parasites to promote their privatization efforts, Ras Baraka overcame it and won a solid victory, campaigning against the privatizers and their apparatchik, Cami Anderson, Their old apparatchik, Cory Booker, has moved on to greener pastures to be his own hype man. With Baraka's victory, the people of Newark sent a clear message to Wall Street and the so-called reformers: not interested, as Mayor-elect Baraka in Newark is not for sale. Story number 4 from Salon. Congratulations, class of 2014. You're totally screwed. College costs more and more, even if it gets objectively worse. Only people worse off than indebted grads, adjuncts. Welcome to the wide world, class of 2014. You have by now noticed the tremendous consignment of debt that the authorities at your college have spent the last 4 years loading on your shoulders. It may interest you to know that the average student loan borrower among you is now $33,000 in debt, the largest of any graduating class ever. And according to a new study by the Pew Research Center, carrying that kind of debt will have certain predictable effects. It will impede your ability to accumulate wealth. For example, you also borrow more for other things than people without debt, and naturally you will find your debt level growing, not shrinking as the years pass. As you probably know, neither your parents nor your grandparents were required to take on this kind of burden in order to go to college. Neither are the people of your own generation in France and Germany and Argentina and Mexico. But in our country, as your commencement speaker will no doubt tell you, the universities are excellent. They are world class. Here's a question I bet you won't hear broached at the commencement stage. Why must college be so expensive? The obvious answer, which I'm sure has been suggested to you 1,000 times, because college is so good. When tuition goes up every year, far outpacing inflation, this indicates that the quality of education in the country is also constantly going up and up. You know that the only way education can cost more is if it's worth more. In some, you pay nearly 60 grand a year to attend some place with a classy WASP name, and ivy growing on its fake medieval walls. You paid for the best, and now you are the best, an honorary classy WASP entitled to all the privileges of the club. That education your parents got, even if it was at the same school as yours, cost them far less and was thus not as good as yours. That's the way progress works, right? Actually, the opposite is closer to the truth. College costs more and more, and even as it gets objectively worse and worse. Yes, I know universities today offer luxuries unimaginable in the 1960s. The awful lives of these workers, popular literature, yeah, so the academics don't make anything, I guess is the next point here. That is, who does the work of knowledge transmission at the ever so costly, ever so excellent American university? Freelancers, contract laborers. Yep. Yes, you are a screwed generation, class of 2014, with a helping of debt that will take you many years to digest. Good times. Thanks, Thomas Frank. Uplifting. Story number 3. This is from Vice. The Democratic Party's future is awash in dark money. Love that picture. Looking for a fight over the heart and soul of the Democratic Party in the waning days of the Obama administration? Next Tuesday morning, take the elevator to the 8th floor of the downtown Washington, D.C. building and step into the offices of America's Natural Gas Alliance, the premier lobbying group for some of the largest fracking companies in the world. While much of the talk about a progressive revival revolves around populist figures like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Senator Elizabeth Warren, there are other better funded efforts afoot. Corporate titans from finance and natural gas to big retail to telecom are attempting to steer the party, and as the midterms shape up, those interests are pushing to ensure they continue to have wide sway of America's only viable outlet for center-left expression at the polls. Which brings us to the latest venture, the New Deal, created by Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley and Senator Mark Begich of Alaska. The New Deal is one of the several cash-rich efforts to resurrect the Democratic Party's flailing bench of electable candidates. The New Deal has little in common with President Roosevelt's New Deal platform, which pledged to save capitalism from itself by cracking down on predatory banking institutions and restoring workplace rights for Americans. No, this New Deal is a 501c4 issue advocacy nonprofit, a tax vehicle which allows campaign activity without disclosure of donors, and its name is an acronym for Developing Exceptional American Leaders. Vice has obtained a supporters list showing donors of the New Deal, which reads like a who's who of corporations seeking government access: Comcast, Fluor, Merck, Microsoft, New York Life, Pfizer, Qualcomm, Verizon, Walmart, the Private Equity Growth Capital Council, among others. While the disclosure of a secret list of political funders is always a worthwhile revelation, it's also worth noting that the same corporate forces that Democrats are leaning on are propping up the far-right total Republicans as well. On the local level, meaning state legislative races, there are two competing committees, the RSLC. A Vice review of recent campaign filing shows that the two committees share many of the same top 25 donors. So the GOP and the Dems both have the same donors. Walmart, Pfizer, tobacco giant Reynolds America, Pharma, AT&T, and Comcast got the biggest checks to both the RSLC and the DLCC. This incredible symmetry exists for the committee seeking to elect governors of their respective parties this year as well. So, try as we might, we just simply can't get these people out of the Democratic Party. They're buying it again. Story number 2, this is about, from Never Forgetting a Face, this is about Joseph Attic, who's talking about one of the pioneers of modern face recognition, having helped advance the fundamental face matching technology in the 1990s. He went into business and promoted the systems to government agencies looking to identify criminals or prevent identity fraud. We save lives, he said during a conference in mid-March. We have solved crimes, thanks in part to his boosterism, the global business of biometrics, using people's unique physiological characteristics like their fingerprint ridges and facial features to learn or confirm their identity is booming. But he actually issued a warning. Face matching today could enable mass surveillance, basically robbing everyone of their anonymity, he says, and inhibits people's normal behavior outside their homes, according to intelligence documents made public by Edward Snowden. So he's not altogether, he's a little upset with how his invention is being used. And the number 1 story from yours truly, Fire Dog Lake. Victoria Nuland accused of meeting with neo-fascists in Washington. In an interview with Bloomberg News, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov asserted that Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs Victoria Nuland had meetings with the Ukrainian neo-fascist group Right Sector in Washington, D.C. The Right Sector has been involved in numerous killings, including the burning of pro-Russian supporters in Odessa. The only thing I wanted to get a response from Washington was these reports about the secret visit of the Right Sector coordinator, Andrei Artoyomenko, to Washington for alleged meetings with Victoria Nuland. And we want answers to these questions because it's too serious to manipulate events in Europe across the Atlantic. It's not a remote control game. It's very serious for us. Whether Nuland met with Artoyomenko or any other representative of the Right Sector to help with fundraising and support is unknown. What is known is that the U.S. is supporting the gang in Kiev interim government, which includes Svoboda, an openly neo-fascist party which aligns itself historically and currently with the principles of Hitler's Nazi Party. Lavrov, who said he questioned U.S. officials' claims made in the German press concerning the employment of mercenaries from companies. Also said he questioned this. Mercenary companies such as Greystone and Academy, formerly Blackwater, in Ukraine. Lavrov said U.S. officials never explicitly denied the charge, but instead made countercharges. And today it has been reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered Russian troops performing maneuvers on the Ukrainian border back to their permanent bases. Whether the troops will actually leave or stay back at base for long is unknown, especially with the Ukrainian presidential election still scheduled for May 25th. It's not so far away. And that is the top 10 at 10. If you have a story you'd like me to feature at the top 10 at 10, please tweet me at Dan S. Wright. Be sure to read all the stories at firedogwake.com. Thanks for watching. See you later.